Hello again, Steve here, with a few words about mythologies. And when I say the word mythology, or myths, I'm talking about it in terms of the common use of the word. I know there's older terms with mythros and so on, but I'm talking about the common, what's commonly used. And I'm just going to read it right off of a dictionary that comes up here. It says, myth, a traditional story, especially one concerning the early history of a people or explaining some natural or social phenomenon, and typically involving supernatural beings or events. Second, that was the first one. The second one is a widely held but false belief or idea. Widely held but false belief or idea. And I just finished listening to a documentary about the history of George Washington. And though much of what was in there I was just amazed with, it didn't surprise me, because every grandiose fakery that's put out there has to be backed up, it seems like, by a equally grandiose myth. Now, this a thing like a country is an artificial construct, right? And because it's artificial, it's obviously fake. It doesn't exist in fact, right? The soil is there, and somebody just came along and created something, or it's creation of somebody's imagination. So in order to reason it, see, human beings, I find, in spite of their perceived, it seems like sometimes people don't seem to be able to reason, but they do reason. Everybody reasons. It's just that their reasoning is false, in terms of there's no real foundation to it. But it is reasoning, because people will very often not just say something and have no justification as to why they would say it. So if you have something that is artificial, in order to reason it through, you have to have reasoning for it. Reasoning has to also be artificial to support it. So this idea that United States is this grandiose something, which has become incredibly corrupted, then it must have had corruption involved in its creation. There's flaws in its creation. It's not true. It's not complete truth, right? Well, it's figments of people's imagination, which are corruptible, and of course, the basic corruption that I would say is the Constitution from the get-go. The Constitution, which says that any group of people has the right to tax others, is inherently evil. So even though it was, I like to use the example of, well, even though it's probably better than some, it's still fundamentally evil on that count. I like to use the example of, if we can agree that slavery is evil, right? So if we have this one guy over here who has 1,000 slaves and he treats them like shit, and we have another guy over here that has one slave and he treats him quite well, yes, we can say that this guy is worse than this guy in terms of his barbarism, but nevertheless, we're not going to say that this is right. In today's, the way we understand things today, we're still going to say that that guy claiming to own one slave and not letting that slave, be self-determined, is in fact evil. So any organization that says they have the right to tax others, thieve from them essentially, and justify it by all kinds of moral platitudes, is, in spite of those perceived moral platitudes, is in fact evil. So to justify this, it almost always, I don't know if there's ever an exception, there has to be kind of like a godly representative. And from what I understand, nobody more than George Washington represents this. George Washington was painted up as this great guy who couldn't tell a lie, this great general, this great savior, this great creator of America. When we look at his life, he was, in so many ways, a very evil man. You know, he was, first of all, from the pampered class. So the only reason he got where he could be was because he was nobility. He was a slave man who treated his slaves like shit. A liar, conniver, backstabber, a thieving man who would, create a Washington, D.C. basically next door to his property so that his property would appreciate, 1,000%. I mean, he was just in it for him, and pretty hard to judge him to say that, he really knew any better. I don't know, but certainly the story that was played out, the story that is told about this great man, is just a lot of horse shit. Just like if we were to look at the story of any supposed great entity who's responsible for so much. We create these artificial constructs of this great thing called America or whatever, or Canada or whatever it is. So we got to create an equally grandiose but fake reasoning for it, including entities who are somehow responsible that we can make statues and graven images of and praise to them and so on, right? So, mythology. I've been looking lately at different organizations that create something that people just really believe in, and they'll kill for it, and they'll throw out their family and throw away their daughters, and they'll just do all kinds of crazy things for this bullshit that somebody made up. I recently looked through the recent events of the fundamentalist Mormons, which even the word fundamentalism is a new word. We used to use the term orthodox, right? Orthodox is kind of like the original. And the other thing that's funny about it is that the fundamentalist Mormons, they're a bunch of polygamists, right? And the mainstream Mormons say, well, they're breakaway Mormons. No, they're not actually. The mainstream Mormon, if you think about it, is the breakaway, because they're the ones who rejected what their founder preached, which was polygamy, right? So the guys who are the nutcases, they're the orthodox, or what we call fundamentalist. But what a wacky thing, they have this, it's just a science fiction or something that's made up by somebody, and they got to be able to say, and this is why. They got to have reasoning, right? Reasoning is, if somebody, when you have a kid who's really young and they keep asking why, they're asking for the reasoning. Well, if you have a box of nonsense and you're carrying it around as though it's something, you have to be able to answer the question why. Well, the question why also has to be a box of nonsense, right? And that's why you see it with all these fake organizations, these Mormons, these Scientologies, these, many religions, the monarchies, the Queen. I mean, look at the nonsense that she goes through with this coronation oath, talking about upholding the true gospel of the Protestant Church, and so help me God, these things, and ruling over people, of just made up areas. It's all mythology, right? It's all mythology. It's based in non-truth. And certainly I would say, though the United States, and I've said it before and I'll say it again, it was an improvement on the box of nonsense, right? Just like the guy who owns one slave, or if he owned 1,000 slaves and treated them like shit, and now he only owns one slave and treats him quite well, yes, that's an improvement. But it doesn't go all the way to something real, to something more upright and just. It's, though yeah, slavery is real. I mean, at least it exists. It has, anyway. I'm just using it as an example of a transition, right? Like there's more untruth and more truth, right? There's versions of it. It could be like something could be 50% truthful and something could be almost completely 100% lies. But so the United States, I would say, is, as far as the concept of nation state, it was the purest idea originally. But because it was still this artificial construct, in order to answer the reason why this could be, I think, had to have an artificial savior or almost a divine entity. And that was, I've come to understand, if this is correct, George Washington to a greater degree than anybody. And I will put the link below to that documentary about George Washington. I think it's very, very helpful. And to understand this, and in terms of our quality of life, to help us break free from this mishmash. There's just so much mash. It's like when we, blend up a smoothie and we get all this mash that we might not want to eat. There's so much of that mixed into the whole discourse of supposed meaningful conversation that we have in life about countries and religions and all that sort of thing. And when we ask the question why, the reasoning we get back from those who are stuck in the mash is a bunch more mash. Because you can't, if you're talking about nonsense, you can't bring in fact to explain it. It's like, it's chaos, something that's completely chaotic. If you ever had a teenage daughter or something like that, and you go into a room and it's completely chaotic, well, you can't even convince yourself that that's any sort of order. It's the opposite, right? So you can't have reason based in fact if you're talking about just nonsense, somebody's wild, a whole bunch of wild fantasies made up, mixed up together, put together, and foisted upon others, or being told that it's true over and over and over and over and over again. Like religions, like countries, like any other form of mythology, right? This is profound to me. This is profound to me. I'm really glad that I put a word out for Stefan Molyneux for doing this work that he's done, and it's not his stuff for sure. He just done his research, the data, the books that were written, and so on. But I think it's valuable to really have an examination of things that we hold as truths. But are they really true? A lot of it is just not, right? We can't point to it, and we can't give good, strong reasoning for it, a line of logical reasoning, then I say it's time to throw it out as being legitimate. And from my experience in doing so, my quality of life goes up, because I don't have to walk around stilted anymore, like I'm trying to hold up this mishmash of untruth. It doesn't matter. I can just let it fall. Truth seems to stand on its own. I don't have to hold it up. Hope this is helpful. It's great chatting.